Good evening, church. If you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 21. That's where we'll be in just a few minutes. I want to kind of set this study up just a little bit as far as what we're going to be talking about tonight with the idea of the widow's mite or mites, because there were two that she dropped in the I guess collection plate is how we would say it. In a minute, we're going to talk a little bit more about this idea. But there's several things about this particular story, this particular time, that I think is important to kind of look at, to kind of see what's going on to get us into this particular story. The story itself is one that has, I guess I'm going to say, survived the test of time. It is a story that generation after generation after generation have heard the story and shared the story and know about this moment in time. Something that I occasionally will purchase a new Bible, and one of the things that I got this year was a chronological Bible. Now, I have another one, but this one was in digital form so that I was able to kind of quickly go through some of the things. And one of the things about the chronological Bible, at least, it's not that scriptures are not translated right. It's just put on the timetable of when something might have happened. And sometimes we read a story that like this in Luke 21, and it is in the right chronological era, but it helps us to see where it fits in the timeline. And so there's a parallel account in Mark chapter 12, and I'm not going to ask you to turn there because it's almost word for word identical to Luke's, and we're going to look at Luke's in a minute. But what we see when we look at Mark's is the time or what had just happened before. Okay, so right before Jesus is in the temple with him, and we see this, and I'm changing it to not the widow's mites, but the widow's offering. Because I think sometimes it is, at least in my mind, I hear the widow's mite and immediately I've got this poor story, and it is. However, it was her offering. It was what she brought. And in this moment, we don't have any indication that Jesus ever talked to her. We don't know what she does after. We don't know what got her into the shape that she was in, where that was all she had. All we have is this account. But in Mark's account, we realize that right before, there's sort of a background to this moment. And if you want to, I'm going to be for just a moment in Matthew chapter 23. You don't have to turn over there. I'm not going to read a lot of it other than just to kind of reiterate what Jesus does in Matthew chapter 23. Now, in this moment, Jesus offers what we call the 7 woes to the scribes and Pharisees, right? You remember some of those. Woe to you scribes, you Pharisees, you what? Hypocrites. The ones who are playing the part. So Jesus in this moment, and Mark's account right before this story, Mark shows us, yes, Jesus had just told them to beware of the Pharisees and their mindset, and then we get this story. But in Matthew's account, we see a much more detailed conversation. What did Jesus attack, if you would? What was his point of emphasis as he goes back and says, woe to you, in verse 13, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the door of the kingdom to people's faces. But you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would to enter. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across the sea and land to win a single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourself. Now, that's just a quick warning of what he's doing. What is he saying? Well, he's saying that they don't have their minds or hearts in the right place. Woe to you who are making the kingdom something you should want, and then when they try to get in, they slam the door on them. In other words, you wasn't good enough. Or, and for those of you who don't know what a proselyte would be someone who was not born Jewish, but you convert them to the Jewish faith, Judaism. And so Jesus was saying, you're making it so you want them to join you, and when they get there, you make it so hard you couldn't even live up to it. And then we get down to verse 23, and it's another woe to you, scribes, you Pharisees, you hypocrites. You tithe mint and deal in cumin, and you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others, you blind guides. straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Verse 25 says, woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside are full of greed and self-indulgence. First, clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that you might have the outside clean as well. Verse 27 says, woe to you, scribes, hypocrite, or Pharisees, hypocrites, for you're like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead man's bones and uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous, but within are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. So there's the background of the story. There's the place that we got to, and you can see Jesus' mindset. Is he really evaluating what we see on the outside? When he went to those 7 woes, where was his target? The inside of the man or the outside? What we see or what we didn't see? And obviously it was what we didn't see. And in this moment of giving, I want to bring the setting. It's in the temple, and I went through and read several commentaries about this, and I want to share with you a couple of things that I thought were really interesting, or at least for me interesting. The conversation, or as we see this moment, Jesus is there in the temple, and it just sort of subtly shows you his power. Did he go up and interview this widow? No. Well, how did he know it was her only 2 mites that she had? How did she know that, or how did he know that it was what she had to live on? Well, we know the simple answer, right? Because he was God. And so in this subtle moment, we see he has the power to see within our hearts. Just like when he attacked the Pharisees and the scribes and the hypocrites, or call them hypocrites. The idea that he could see inside of them, he knew what they were about. So here's this moment where Jesus' power, his ability to see and know everything, is on display. The position of this treasury is unknown. But apparently within the court of women, which would have been some of the outer courts of the temple, they had placed 13 boxes in the wall for the reception of the alms of the people. They were called trumpets because of the shape of these metal containers. Now, our tradition is to collect the money by passing the plate, right? We call it passing the plate. Well, back in the day, as you came into the temple to worship, guess what you would do? The plate wouldn't be passed to you. You would stop by one of those trumpets and drop your money in. Now, Jesus addresses this in other place. He said that the rich really like to do this. Now, I'm going to overplay or oversell it, but this is kind of what in some of the studies that have been done. They would have taken and realized they didn't have currency dollar bills. It was coins. And it was a weight of coin. And so the more valuable and so forth, the more you put in. And guess what would happen is you would drop them into these sort of copper basins or bowls or trumpets. What would happen? Lots of noise, right? And so as you study and you start realizing a lot of times they would try to drop them a little higher. Why would they want to do that? Louder. And people would go, who's here now? Who is making a gift, making their offering to the Lord? And Jesus said, when you make it that way, guess what? You got what you wanted. Yeah, that's what he says in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6. But here's this woman, and she's dropping these mites, these really, and the actual name for those in the Greek is the idea of the thin coin. It would have been one that was, or the thin one, not the thin coin, the thin one. And so here it is. It's the smallest of all coins. The value of this particular coin, this offering that was there, was 1/16 of a penny. Now, honestly, if you go grab another commentary, it's going to say 1/10, and it's going to have another say 1/20. But here's what we know. It wasn't much of anything. In the law itself of the temple, it was the smallest legal gift possible. There was nothing else that could have been dropped in there that was acceptable. It was the smallest. So for our mindset, well, maybe for our little kids it won't be this way. For our mindsets, it would have been a penny, right? Penny saves, a penny earned. Well, that won't hold much anymore, right? Now it's going to be a nickel saves, a nickel earned as we go forward. But in this idea, the mite was we've gone to the smallest of the small. And in that, it's a 1/16th of what we would consider the penny or something of whole value. Now, again, you've got chapter 21, verse 4 opened, right? Look at the very end. She was in poverty, and it was all she had to live on. You know, it wasn't that was what was left. This was all that she had to live on. This idea that she would come in and she would make this offering to the Lord. What does that subtly tell us? Where was her trust? In God. I'm giving this up for you, God. You're going to have to get me through. I talked to someone who had been on the mission field, and the conversation we had about what they enjoyed about being on the mission field was seeing the people's faith and trust in God. Like the person I was talking to said, it was just, you could feel it. There was no expectation about tomorrow. They just trusted that God was going to get them. We don't often live that way. And I'm going to say maybe I won't come back. Bobby doesn't always live that way. I'm thinking about what tomorrow might hold and what I might be doing tomorrow. And I've never got to the point where my last 1/16th of a penny was all I had to live on. But here she was, willing to give that. She obeyed the law. She made the sacrifice. That's what she did. She was willing to trust God to get her through what she was facing. So as we read this story again, I'm going to start at verse 1 of Luke chapter 21. And we see that Jesus looked up. He saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box, and he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. We call those mites. And he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them." What's he saying there? How could that be more than all of them? Well, it was because as she made that offering in her poverty, that was all she had. And these rich folks, or these at least people who had more blessings, even though they might have made a sizable contribution, and they probably did, I'm going to suggest that it was a loud contribution that several of them made. And Jesus said she gave more than them. Why? For as they contributed out of their abundance, she out of her poverty put in all that she had. So when we think about this story, and honestly it quickly leaves the story and goes on to the end of Jesus' life. He in Matthew's account, he goes on and predicts the end of the temple, and he predicts that Jesus is coming back again, and then we get into the crucifixion. It's really close to the end of Jesus' life. Luke's account follows pretty much the same chronological time frame. But in this moment, this little blip of time, where Jesus is evaluating the hearts of those who are evil, we get this little comparison of a heart of someone who is fully relying on God. You know, if we paused and I were to say, if God looked in your heart, would you get a woe? If he looked at your heart, would he get a woe unto you? For the heart that I'm looking at is one that is self-centered. The heart I'm looking at is one that's cold. The heart I'm looking at is one that is not focused on God and not trusting on him. Is that the heart he's going to look at? Or when he looks at the heart, here is a heart, one who is surrendering all to him, one who is willing to give what they have in full trust that God's going to get them through. What kind of heart do we have? That's really the question for me as we study this topic this evening. Thank you for your study time with me. I hope it's helped you. If you have any questions, we can grow further in our study together. The invitation of the Lord is open, and if you stand in need in any way, let us know how we can help as together we stand and sing.